In the 5th year of my secret crush on Colin, he fell in love with another girl. For her, he abandoned me time and time again. In the first moment of the car accident, he bypassed me and rushed to save her. In that accident, my hearing in my right ear was damaged. Later, I got married, and the groom was someone he introduced to me. He cried until his eyes were red and begged me. "I never thought you two would really end up together, Shelley, please don't leave me." I pried his fingers off one by one and said with a smile, "Colin, don't be pathetic." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. On Valentine's Day, Colin suddenly said he had a surprise for me. He must be planning to confess to you on this special day. "Shelley, your good days are coming." My best friend, who knew about my 5-year crush on Colin, was excited, her eyes narrowing into slits with her smile. The couple I've been shipping is finally going to come true. Valentine's Day, surprise. These words made my heart fill with anticipation. My friend's certainty made my heartbeat accelerate even more. Following the location Colin gave me, I carefully dressed up before heading out. The front hall of the club was decorated grandly and atmospherically, with rose petals covering the floor and balloons adorning the walls. My fingertips trembled uncontrollably as I walked step by step towards the large words "I like you" on the wall. I imagined the expression I might have when Colin confessed. Suddenly, a hand reached out from a door beside me, pulled me in. And before I could react, he pushed me forward into another man's arms. "Shelley, let me introduce you to a boyfriend." Then, turning to the man, he said with a smile, "Steve, take care of her." The man named Steve clearly hadn't reacted yet, instinctively supporting my waist to steady me before letting go. Gentlemanly, with a sense of propriety. "Colin, what's going on?" Steve's deep voice sounded in my ear, with a hint of anger in his tone. Colin suddenly smiled ambiguously. "Today's Valentine's Day, I'm entrusting my sister to you." Seeing this farce, even if I were slow-witted, I would have realized by now that today's protagonist wasn't me. I was like disposable trash being tossed around by him. My heart, suspended in midair, suddenly plunged into the abyss, and I asked hoarsely, "Colin, what exactly are you doing?" Colin took a deep breath, staring unblinkingly at the crack in the door, his slightly rapid breathing revealing his nervousness. But there was an unusual glint in his eyes. "Shelley, I'm going to confess." His gaze didn't even spare me a moment. At that moment, the sound of high heels clicking on the floor came from outside the door, and a look of joy and determination erupted in Colin's eyes. He pushed open the door, holding a bouquet, and walked step by step towards the girl. I was jostled by others, forced to witness Colin's confession. "Mandy, I like you, will you be with me?" Just like her name, the girl was gentle and lovely. A look of surprise flashed across her face, followed by understanding as she took the bouquet, but then her gaze suddenly fixed on me. "Colin, I'm a very jealous person. If you want to be my boyfriend, you can't have other women around." She held her head high, with obvious hostility in her expression towards me. "She's just my sister." He then pointed to Steve standing behind me and said with a low laugh, "That's the boyfriend she's about to start seeing." Mandy visibly sighed in relief and threw herself into Colin's arms. The surrounding people cheered. Watching this scene, I suddenly felt a bit numb. His so-called surprise was to find me a boyfriend so his girlfriend wouldn't have any doubts about being with him. Someone in the corner murmured softly, "Childhood friends can never compete with new lovers." Bringing Mandy into the private room made the atmosphere even more lively. Colin had arranged everything in advance and suggested playing truth or dare. The empty bottle almost always pointed in their direction. The game got more and more intense, and before long, Colin and Mandy were sharing a cookie. The cookie got shorter and shorter, until it finally disappeared between their lips. They kissed passionately, unable to separate. I suddenly couldn't sit still and wanted to go out for some fresh air. Someone tapped my shoulder and whispered in my ear, "Want to go out?" I looked up, surprised. Steve was different from Colin. He had been laid back the whole evening, seeming like an outsider, uninterested in everything happening. When the bottle pointed at him once and others urged him to take a dare and Princess carry me, he chose to drink a penalty shot instead. I thought he wasn't interested in me. Seeing my hesitation, he repeated. Are you coming or not? Or do you want to stay and watch a meaningless reality show all night? He referred to Colin's confession as a meaningless reality show, which was a bit sharp-tongued but hit the mark. I reached out, and he pulled me up. What are we going to do? Sober up. I never expected Steve's way of sobering up was mountain climbing. I wasn't in great shape, and halfway up, I was panting and slipped on a rock. I really couldn't go any further. Sitting on a rock halfway up the mountain, I complained. I'm not climbing anymore, I can't get up. Only after saying that did I realize I was acting spoiled to a guy I had just met, which wasn't like me. The guy, standing a step away, sighed, turned around, stretched out his hand, and raised an eyebrow with a bit of a roguish grin. I only have $200 on me. Do I qualify to help you? The mountain breeze lifted the hair from his forehead, revealing a stunningly handsome face. Charming, sunny. I followed his lead, saying, didn't expect to meet a pauper, guess I won't make any money today. Steve looked at me for a moment. Well, I guess I've met a freeloader. Then he resignedly squatted down and patted his shoulder. Come on, princess, I'll carry you. The rest of the fee can go on credit. Looking at his broad back, I couldn't help but ask. Weren't you unwilling to carry me just now? What's the difference between a princess carry and a piggyback ride? He didn't answer immediately but picked me up and started walking steadily up the mountain. Then he solemnly said, in the private room, they only asked if I wanted to carry you, but they didn't give you a choice. Here, you don't have to think about anything else. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it. Hearing this, I was stunned. We had known each other for less than 24 hours, yet he hit the nail on the head, knowing exactly what I cared about the most. No one had ever said such things to me. Even at Colin's house, I habitually hid my preferences, cautiously trying to please them. Over time, I had forgotten my own desires. Yet someone told me that if I didn't like something, I didn't have to do it. Finally reaching the top of the mountain, the sky was still dark, and Steve's voice softly broke the silence. Get some sleep. I'll wake you up after the sunrise. Being with him, I felt no pressure, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep. In a daze, he nudged me. Wake up. I squinted my eyes, opening them just a sliver, only to be stunned by the view in front of me. A ray of sunlight pierced through the darkness, its brilliant light exploring this once chaotic world like a probing tentacle. In that instant, my mood brightened. Back home, I checked my phone and realized that Colin had called me more than 20 times at some point. I ignored it and saw Steve's latest post. Look up, romance is playing. There were 2 photos, one of the sunrise and the other of me. Just from looking at the photos and the caption, I could imagine his mischievous face. As I was about to comment, Colin's voice startled me. Do you know how many times I called you? Why didn't you answer? He had his hands against the wall, cornering me, using a tone I had never heard before. Did you go watch the sunrise with Steve? He must have seen Steve's post too. I nodded and was about to leave, but he pulled me back, staring at me intensely. How far have you 2 gone? Did he kiss you? You've only known him for less than a day, and you spent the night together? His grip was tight, his eyes dark. Shelley, are you being too casual? This jealous tone and expression were new to me, and I didn't want to think too much about it. I looked up to meet his gaze, no space left to retreat in the cramped area. Colin, you introduced him to me as my boyfriend. What does it matter to you what a couple does? Colin suddenly froze, a blank look on his face. His attitude softened immediately, trying to placate me. Shelley, I was wrong. If you don't like Steve, you don't have to force yourself. I'll talk to him. After all, what my Shelley likes is the most important. If he had thought this way from the start, he wouldn't have pushed me towards someone else without asking my opinion. And then show up acting like a good guy afterward. What is this? A slap followed by a sweet treat? Colin seemed very sure that I wouldn't like Steve, his calm eyes showing his usual confidence. I stepped aside, putting some distance between us. No need. A flash of panic crossed his face. What do you mean? Have you really taken a liking to him? At that moment, a voice came from the stairway. Colin, do you have any disposable toothbrushes and towels? Hearing the voice, Colin instinctively let go of my hand and stepped back 2 paces. In front of us, Mandy walked closer wearing my pajamas, a smile on her face, looking every bit like the lady of the house. I watched the sunrise with Steve, and he called me casual. But he brought his girlfriend home the night they confessed. What a player. I smirked, my face showing disdain, and Colin instinctively explained. Shelley, there's nothing between us. I suddenly found it funny and actually laughed out loud. Colin, you don't need to explain to me. What he did with Mandy didn't interest me. Colin's expression was a bit dazed, like he didn't know what he was doing. After a while, he finally came to his senses and kissed Mandy on the face to reassure her, his tone affectionate. I'll get it for you. The 3 of us silently finished breakfast, and Mandy said she was leaving. Shelley, aren't you heading back to school today too? Why don't we go together? Colin, acting as if nothing had happened, smiled and said, let's go together. The driver isn't here today, so you'll have to call a cab later. After what had just happened, I didn't want to have any more contact with them. But this was a villa area, and getting a cab wasn't easy. I had no choice but to agree. Mandy didn't have much to say to me. She kept clinging to Colin, talking about the silly things he did when he was pursuing her. Every now and then, she would ask me in a boastful tone. Colin was really foolish, wasn't he? Shelley, do you think Colin and I are a good match? I closed my eyes, letting her voice echo in the enclosed car. Occasionally, I would respond with a simple Seeing that I wasn't reacting, she stopped talking to me. Instead, Colin's face turned a bit gloomy. Suddenly, Mandy's voice became particularly sharp. Colin, why are you still wearing that watch? Do you think the one I gave you isn't good enough? Hearing this, I opened my eyes and glanced at Colin's wrist. He was still wearing the quartz watch I gave him. I had bought it for him after working 2 summer jobs. It wasn't worth much to him, but he always wore it. He told me he really liked this watch, that the thought behind it was more important than the money. But hearing Mandy's words, he hurriedly pulled down his sleeve to cover the watch. I'll change it when we get back to school. Mandy, however, wouldn't let it go, staring intently at the watch. I've told you several times to change it, but you haven't. Why do you care so much about this watch? Colin, do you like the person who gave you this watch? Hearing this, I sneered inwardly. Like? How could that be possible? But a blank look flashed across Colin's face, and he mumbled, like? It seemed even he hadn't noticed the confusion on his face. At that moment, a truck suddenly appeared ahead. The horn blared sharply. Colin reacted quickly, gripping the steering wheel to avoid it, but the road wasn't wide enough, and the car crashed into the guardrail on one side. A flash of white light appeared before my eyes. I struggled to open my eyes and tried to call out, but saw Colin struggling to pull Mandy out from the passenger seat. Mandy cried as she threw herself into his arms. Meanwhile, a buzzing sound persisted in my right ear until I seemed to lose all sensation. At this moment, I suddenly remembered the scene when Colin first took me to his house. My parents had been in a car accident, and all my relatives avoided me like the plague. I didn't speak at all. It was Colin who tirelessly shared stories about his school, his friends with me every day. He put everything he thought was fun in front of me. He solemnly told me, Shelley, from now on, this is your home. If anyone bullies you, I'll help you bully them back. But the one who left me without a second thought was him. 5 years of a secret crush vanished in that car accident. When I woke up again, the smell of disinfectant filled my nose. My right ear was bandaged, feeling a bit numb and swollen. The first person I saw was Steve. When he saw me, there was a mix of surprise, guilt, and sadness on his face. In the end, only a reassuring smile remained. If you hadn't woken up, I would have grown old waiting. He looked a bit haggard, but still clean and handsome. He helped me sit up, handed me a piece of cut apple, and carefully looked me over. You had a minor surgery, nothing serious, just some hearing loss. It's a bit troublesome, you'll need to visit the hospital a few more times. Then he proudly nudged his chin. Just so happens I'm free. There seemed to be a kind of power in him, making his words instinctively believable. It felt like if he said it was fine, then it would be fine. I wanted to speak, but my mouth was full of apple. At this moment, a figure suddenly rushed in, tightly grabbing my hand, looking anxious yet delighted. "Shelley, you're awake." I had only been asleep for a day, but Colin looked like he hadn't slept for several days. His face full of stubble, hair drooping over his forehead, looking particularly disheveled. Someone who didn't know might think he was the one who had surgery. He was always mature and steady. It was the first time I saw him like this. I withdrew my hand. At the first moment of the car accident, he chose his girlfriend, which was understandable. But I couldn't let it go. At that moment, I had already decided not to like him anymore. Seeing me pull back my hand, Colin's hand froze in midair, a flash of pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Shelley. I thought I would be very sad." But at this moment, I felt especially calm. In the past, Colin brought me out of the darkness and told me I wasn't alone. Over the years, my gratitude towards him had actually surpassed my feelings, but I blurred the line between the two. Instinctively, I placed my last bit of gentleness towards life on him. I swallowed the chewed apple. "Colin, you didn't do anything wrong." Colin's voice suddenly trembled, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Shelley, don't talk to me like this. It's right for you to blame me. I didn't take good care of you." I interrupted him. "You didn't do anything wrong. Choosing your girlfriend was the right thing to do, but I don't want to see you now." He instinctively wanted to argue, but seeing me cover my ear, he stopped. His hand, which had been frozen in midair, was withdrawn. Seeing him made my ear seem to hurt again. "Please leave, I want to be alone." Colin hesitated, then finally said to Steve. "Take good care of her, I'll leave now." Steve didn't respond, just raised an eyebrow, his tongue pressing against the roof of his mouth, and said playfully, "I'll see you out." Half an hour later, Steve came back, his face showing a bit of bruising but with a smile. "Here, didn't you want to eat roasted sweet potatoes? I brought you some." It was during the sunrise, and it was a bit cold. I had murmured that it would be nice to have some roasted sweet potatoes to eat. I didn't expect him to remember it until now. I looked at his face and teased him. "So, did you get beaten up by the guy selling roasted sweet potatoes?" Steve raised his chin, revealing a bit of bruising there. It didn't affect his looks, instead, it made him appear both fierce and endearing. "Yeah, I didn't have any money on me, so the guy selling sweet potatoes chased me all the way." He lifted the sweet potato with my hand, indicating that I should eat it quickly. "Hurry up and eat it. If he catches up, we'll be caught red-handed. Eat it now to destroy the evidence." I burst out laughing. This rich kid, how could he possibly dine and dash? Most likely, he had a fight with Colin. "Thank you, Steve." Steve ruffled my hair. "What's there to worry about? If you don't like someone, get back at them. Make others unhappy, not yourself." The rich aroma of the sweet potato filled the air, warm and sweet. My heart also felt warm. Since that day, Steve has been by my side until I was discharged from the hospital. The moment I got home, the first thing I did was pack my clothes. I wanted to move out. While I was packing, the door suddenly opened. It was Colin. When he saw me, a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. But his face was still marked with red marks and bruises, even more than Steve's. I suddenly felt a bit proud. Steve had won the fight. It felt like I had won a victory myself. "Shelley, you're back? Why didn't you call me to pick you up?" Colin hurriedly walked up to me, but when he saw me packing my clothes, the joy in his eyes vanished. "Where are you going?" His expression was both anxious and fearful. He quickly held down my hands that were packing my clothes, his action stubborn and firm. "This is your home, Shelley, you're not allowed to leave." He took out the clothes I had placed in the suitcase, one by one. After putting the clothes back in the closet, he firmly closed the closet door. Seeing the clothes neatly arranged in the closet, he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Watching all this, I suddenly felt a bit tired. "Colin, you're making me do pointless work like this." "I didn't mean that." He suddenly looked very aggrieved. "I know you're angry with me, I just don't want you to leave." I knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but it just felt unpleasant. I couldn't stay under the same roof with him any longer. "Colin, you have no right to stop me." I pulled the suitcase in front of me and took the clothes out of the closet again, repeating the process several times. Actually, I didn't have many clothes. Living in Colin's house, I still couldn't feel as at ease as I did in my own home. I always thought that if one day I was abandoned again, I could take all my things with me in one go. I really had no sense of security. And indeed, I was abandoned. He didn't stop me again, stiffly watching me put the clothes into the suitcase one by one. The light streamed in through the window, casting a long shadow on the wooden floor, making him look desolate and forlorn. As I zipped up the suitcase, he suddenly asked me softly, as if grasping at the last straw, "Do you not like me anymore?" "What?" I looked up at him in disbelief. Seeing his expression, I knew I hadn't misheard. I always thought he didn't know I liked him, but it turned out he knew all along. So, he had been pretending not to know all these years. What was his mindset when he introduced boyfriends to me? I suddenly laughed, a cold, indifferent laugh. "Colin, you really make me feel like my feelings for you over these years were blind." I grabbed the handle and was about to walk out. Colin followed me, clinging to the suitcase handle. "Shelley." He didn't finish his sentence before he was interrupted by a nonchalant voice. "Baby, you're too slow." Steve was leaning against the railing of the stairs, wearing a black wool coat, the breeze ruffling a few strands of his hair. He walked over casually, taking the suitcase away. Not just Colin, even I was startled by his use of baby. Colin stared at me intently. "You two have progressed to this stage already?" His fists clenched tightly, veins bulging, as if he would rush up and fight at any moment. After a moment, he seemed to think of something and relaxed, looking somewhat smug. "Steve, did you know Shelley used to like me? For so many years, how could she just stop liking me so easily?" He spoke with great certainty. "Are you two doing this to get back at me?" Hearing him say this made me feel like I had swallowed a fly. Steve also stopped, saying disdainfully, "You said it yourself, it was in the past. Taking a girl's feelings for you as something to brag about, as a man, I feel ashamed for you. I value the next 50 years more than the past 5. As for revenge?" Steve paused. "You're not even worth it." After speaking, he genuinely smiled sarcastically. "Oh, and I haven't thanked you yet. Thank you for introducing Shelley to me. I really like her." Colin was left speechless. As I went downstairs, I saw Steve's car and was slightly taken aback. The Porsche logo was particularly conspicuous. Is this what he called a beat-up second-hand car? He had told me pitifully that he would drive a beat-up second-hand car to pick me up, so I wouldn't despise him. I had even subconsciously comforted him. But who in their right mind would call a Porsche a beat-up second-hand car? "The thing you just said." Before I could finish, Steve suddenly gestured for me to look at the rearview mirror. To my surprise, Colin had actually followed us out, staring intently at the car, stepping forward step by step. "Do you want to provoke him a little?" His eyes were bewitching, and I nodded instinctively as if under a spell. Steve suddenly smiled, a wicked smile. He reached out and touched my lips, something seemed about to happen. "I've always wanted to taste this." With those words, his warm lips descended. All my questions were blocked by his kiss. There was a knock on the car window. Outside was Colin with a murderous expression. Steve didn't roll down the window, but retreated to his seat and gently reminded me, "Buckle up." Before I could react, he had already started the engine. Colin was quickly left behind, disappearing from sight. Back at school, I learned that Colin and Mandy had broken up. Just like their initial confession, their breakup was also a big spectacle. I wasn't interested in the matter, but the more I didn't want to hear about it, the more it appeared in front of me. At the corner of the stairs, Mandy, with red-rimmed eyes, asked Colin, "Are you really breaking up with me? Why? What did I do wrong?" She lifted her pant leg, looking a bit aggrieved. "I got hurt too. Did you see the scar on my leg? I can never wear shorts or skirts again, but Colin, you didn't even ask about it. I went to the hospital alone to get my wound treated, while you stayed outside Shelley's ward every day." Who is your girlfriend, really? A ghastly scar ran from her thigh to her calf. It was clear and frightening. Unlike Mandy's nearly collapsing emotions, Colin's voice was very cold. I don't like you anymore. Hearing this, Mandy threw herself into his arms, grabbing his waist tightly, tears streaming down in panic. Colin, I was wrong, I was too willful, please don't leave me. Without the initial affection, Colin's eyes were only filled with impatience, and he forcefully pulled Mandy away. Stop clinging to me. Mandy suddenly seemed a bit hysterical, her eyes red, tears flowing. Colin, what did you say when you were pursuing me? You said you'd treat me well, you said you'd pamper me no matter how willful I was. But now, not long after we got together, you don't want me anymore? She stepped forward, grabbed Colin's hand, and before he could react, she quickly pulled up his sleeve. Seeing the watch on his wrist, she was stunned, then reached out to grab it. I knew it! This was given by Shelley, wasn't it? Don't think I don't know, you like Shelley, right? That's why you were tossing and turning at night, calling her again and again. And you wear this cheap watch like it's a treasure. A flicker of confusion crossed Colin's face, but then he became resolute. Yes, I like her. He grabbed Mandy by the back of her neck with one hand and pulled her back a step. Don't bother me anymore. Mandy cried and then suddenly laughed. Colin, you're just a masochist, you like what you can't have. People like you are destined to be unhappy. Colin remained silent, letting her continue. I wasn't interested in their argument, but I was forced to listen to the whole thing. When Mandy left, sniffling, and the surroundings fell silent again, I started to walk down. To my surprise, Colin hadn't left yet. After a few steps, I was yanked in front of him with great force, my hands restrained as he pinned me against the wall. The kiss came down immediately, filled with brute force and an inexplicable resentment. He kissed me with such intensity that I couldn't break free, so I had to bite him. The pain lingered between my lips and teeth, and Colin had no choice but to let me go. There was a noticeable bite mark on his lip, the blood spreading, making him look dangerously fierce. Shelley, you heard everything, didn't you? He clenched his fists, his tone unfriendly. How could you kiss Steve? Did he kiss you as well as I do? He grabbed my chin, questioning me. How could you say you don't like me anymore? He looked so confident, but what right did he have to ask me that? How low did he think of me to make him believe that even though he had a girlfriend, I should still like him? I raised my foot and headbutted him, forcing him back a step. My hands were freed as well. I slapped him. Colin, you don't like me, but you expect me to keep liking you? What does it matter to you what I do with others? What right do you have to control me? He let out a laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Instead, his whole demeanor was shrouded in gloom. I saw you kissing him, and it drove me mad. You clearly like me. He wiped his lower lip with his thumb and moved closer to me again. You just heard it too, I like you. He looked at me quietly, with hope in his eyes. Let's start over, without Mandy, without Steve, okay? I laughed angrily, really wanting to dig into his brain to see what it was made of. Colin, are you crazy? What makes you think I should revolve around you? He frowned, then suddenly squatted down, his voice hoarse as he asked me. Is there no chance at all? His expression was desolate, his spine bending inch by inch. He looked nothing like the always high-spirited Colin I knew. After several follow-up checks, my ear had basically recovered. During the last checkup at the hospital, the doctor smiled and said, "You don't need to come back next time, just take care of yourself." Then he pointed at Steve and teased. Is this your boyfriend? He accompanies you every time, you two have a great relationship. Just as I was about to refute, Steve spoke up before me. Yes, doctor, you're right. I wasn't sure which part he was responding to. We were silent the whole way back. When we reached the apartment building, he stopped the car and leaned over pitifully to ask me, when will you officially acknowledge me? We've already kissed. Even the doctor can't stand it anymore. I suddenly felt very nervous, but my mind was bursting with fireworks, vibrant and dazzling. You already have a title. He smiled happily and asked, what title? I unbuckled my seatbelt, ran out of the car, and shouted through the window. Boyfriend, goodbye. He laughed gleefully. I did too, humming a tune all the way, my heart pounding like a little deer. Just as I was about to enter the community, a car suddenly stopped in front of me, parked haphazardly. Before it even came to a complete stop, someone got out. He pulled me towards his car. If it weren't for that face, the one I'd had a crush on for 5 years, I would have really thought I had encountered a kidnapper. Colin, what are you doing? He pushed me into the passenger seat, fastened the seatbelt from the right side, and walked around the front of the car to get in. When I tried to open the door, he suddenly turned to me with a dark expression. Good thing you didn't let him come upstairs, or I really don't know what I would have done. His demeanor was so gloomy it was terrifying. It felt like he was going to devour me in the next second. Be good, okay? He locked the car door, and I couldn't open it. I turned my face away, not wanting to look at him. Our relationship was already strained, not provoking him was the best I could do. How could I possibly be good? I stayed silent, not answering. Seeing my expression, Colin tried to appease me by gently stroking my hair. I tried to dodge, but he pulled me back. In the tense atmosphere, he suddenly smiled and said, "Shelley, I have a surprise for you." With that, he started the engine. This was his new car, the first time I was sitting in it. But I still had a shadow from the previous car accident, my face pale as he drove me to a high-end club. He got out and brought me along. The ground was covered with rose petals, starting from the doorway, arranged even more elaborately than when he confessed to Mandy. Everyone passing by whispered enviously about me. I sneered inwardly, already knowing what he was going to do. If it were before, I would have thought this was a surprise, but now, I feel it's a joke. I woke up from this dream, but Colin hasn't yet. The same group of friends rushed out together. Be together! Be together! They were like a hype group, cheering and shouting no matter who came. Colin looked at me with burning eyes and handed me a bouquet of roses. "Shelley, everything I owe you, I will make up for." I threw the flowers straight to the ground. Colin's face turned ugly, but he still held back. "Shelley, isn't this what you want?" "I am making amends, what more do you want?" I laughed angrily. What I want? Everything before my eyes made me feel sick. The arrangements, the scene, and the person in front of me. Do you know what I want? I want you to get lost. The venue fell silent, and the applause stopped abruptly. Everyone realized that this was a failed confession. Colin's lips were tightly pressed together, and faint veins appeared on his forehead. He suddenly softened and pulled me into his arms. "Shelley, I know what you care about. I've always liked you, I just didn't want to ruin our relationship, I was afraid we couldn't even be friends." I stomped on his foot hard, and when he winced in pain, I pushed him away and laughed coldly. "When you introduced me to a boyfriend, when you left me behind in the car accident, why didn't I feel you liked me then? You said you were afraid we couldn't be friends, so what about now? Do you think we have anything to do with being friends?" Colin's lips moved, wanting to explain something, but I interrupted him. "Colin, Mandy was right, you only like the ones you can't have." For so many years, even if he had told me once that he liked me, I would have thrown myself at him like a moth to a flame. "No. You are different from her. I really like you." As he spoke, his eyes suddenly widened, looking straight behind me. I turned around too. I saw Mandy holding a knife, reflecting a strange light under the lamp. She ran towards me. I realized the knife was aimed at me. Mandy's eyes were bloodshot, her face irrational, staring at me fiercely. "Shelley, go to hell!" The change happened too suddenly, and no one reacted. Colin instinctively threw himself in front of me, taking the knife from me, and bright red liquid flowed continuously from him. Seeing this, Mandy suddenly collapsed to the ground in fear, muttering, "I didn't mean it, you forced me." She was subdued by others. When the ambulance and police arrived, Colin was still holding me tightly, his blood staining my white dress red. His words were disjointed, but he kept repeating, "Shelley, hug me. I'm so cold." Colin was pushed into the operating room, and I stood at the door feeling a bit dazed. Over the years, he had really treated me well. But later, we became like strangers. I don't know where things went wrong. I fell into a daze. Until the surgery light went off and the doctor came out. The surgery was very successful. I breathed a sigh of relief. Colin woke up, but he seemed to have forgotten me. He stared at me, his eyes a bit confused. "Are you my girlfriend?" I went to ask the doctor. The doctor said he might be in shock, and it's normal to not remember temporarily. I didn't answer his question. But he was very persistent, asking repeatedly. "I feel like you look familiar. You're my girlfriend, right?" I shook my head, took a step back, my voice cold. "We don't know each other, I just happened to save you." "Really?" The light in his eyes dimmed inch by inch, and like grasping at the last straw, he kept staring at me. "We really don't know each other?" It's best that he doesn't remember me. I neither love him nor hate him. But we can only be strangers. We don't know each other. I placed his phone on the table. "You can check to see which friends you have and ask them to come accompany you. This should be the last time I come here." I deleted all the information about me from his phone. Even as I walked out of the hospital, I could still feel that gaze following me, like a shadow. After that, I occasionally saw Colin at school. But I always looked away first when he stared at me. Everyone seemed to tacitly accept that we were strangers and no longer brought up anything about Colin to me. After that, the times I ran into him seemed to become fewer and fewer. Steve and I decided to get married right after graduation. When he slipped the engagement ring onto my finger, he breathed a sigh of relief. Now the only worry is someone crashing the wedding. I laughed at his needless worry, but I never expected to see Colin again at the wedding. I was a bit surprised because I hadn't invited him at all. Unlike the image I was familiar with, his eyes were bloodshot, his suit was full of wrinkles, and he reeked of alcohol from a hangover. This little incident didn't affect the wedding proceedings. What I didn't expect was that he would rush straight to the center of the hall, gripping my hand tightly and pleading. "Shelley," I remembered. "I love you, please don't leave me." The guests were in an uproar, whispering among themselves. "What's going on?" Family members, live broadcast of a wedding crash, trending topic incoming. Steve pulled me behind him. "Colin, what are you doing?" Colin, completely irrational, shouted at Steve, "Give her back to me. I really can't live without her." His eyes reddened, and he suddenly started crying. "Shelley, you lied to me, you said we were strangers. You made everyone lie to me. But now you're going to marry someone else." The security guards, seeing his state, hesitated to approach. "I can't accept you marrying another man, I'm insanely jealous, the one standing on the stage should have been us." His voice trembled, growing more urgent, looking at me with hopeful and pleading eyes. "Shelley, give me one more chance, please? I know I was wrong, we can start over, we can be happy together." I walked up to him, and he thought my attitude had softened, gripping my hand tightly. "Colin." I pried his fingers off one by one, watching the light in his eyes dim inch by inch. "Don't be pathetic. We are destined to be nothing but strangers." I signaled the security to take him away. The wedding proceeded as planned. Steve held me and whispered when he kissed me. "Good thing you didn't run off with him. Otherwise, the next time you get married, I'd be the one crashing the wedding." I kissed him hard, shutting him up.